What if I told you there's a car so low, so radical, that it could literally drive under a parking barrier? A car that looked like it came straight out of a sci-fi movie, but was built in 1970. This isn't a dream. This is the Lancia Stratos HF Zero, a one-off concept car that redefined automotive design forever. In the late 1960s, the car world was changing fast. Muscle cars were roaring in America, supercars like the Lamborghini Miura were rewriting performance rules in Europe, and design studios were entering what we now call the wedge era. Sharp angles, low silhouettes, and futuristic lines were replacing the curvy designs of the 1950s and early 60s. At the center of this revolution was Marcello Gandini, the mastermind designer working for Bertone. Gandini had already stunned the world with the Alfa Romeo Carrabbo, a concept that looked like it had been sliced by a knife, and of course, the legendary Lamborghini Miura, often called the first true supercar. But Gandini wasn't done. He wanted to push the wedge design to its absolute limit. That's when the idea of the Lancia Stratos HF Zero was born. This wasn't just a design sketch for the future. It was a full-blown concept car. And it wasn't created in partnership with Lancia at first. In fact, Bertone took a huge risk. He spent 40 million lira of his own company's money, an astronomical amount at the time, just to prove a point, that design could be bold, uncompromising, and still functional. To build it, Bertone's team started with something humble, the chassis and mechanical parts from a Lancia Fulvia HF 1600, a car that had rallying pedigree but nothing close to the futuristic look Gandini envisioned. They stripped down a wrecked Fulvia and used its 1.6-liter V4 engine and 5-speed manual gearbox as the beating heart of the new machine. From there, Gandini asked himself a radical question. How low can a car really go? And the answer became history. The Stratos Zero stood at just 84 centimeters tall, about 33 inches. To put that into perspective, it was lower than the average person's beltline. Parked next to any other car of the time, it looked like something from another planet. And getting into the Zero was unlike anything else. Forget doors. The only way inside was by lifting the entire windshield forward. Drivers had to step over the pointed nose, lower themselves into a cockpit that felt more like a fighter jet, and then watch the steering wheel retract on a hydraulic column just to make room for their legs. It was pure theater, a ritual that told you this was no ordinary automobile. Of course, creating a car this radical came with challenges. Cooling a mid-mounted V4 in such a cramped space wasn't easy. Visibility was terrible thanks to the ultra-low stance. Comfort? Practically non-existent. But none of that mattered. This wasn't a car designed to commute. It was a car designed to shock the world. And shock it did. When the Stratos Zero was unveiled at the 1970 Turin Motor Show, it didn't just attract attention, it stole the entire show. Crowds surrounded it, journalists called it a spaceship on wheels, and Lancia executives couldn't ignore the buzz. But perhaps the most legendary story comes from Nuccio Bertone himself. Eager to impress Lancia, he drove the Stratos Zero straight to their headquarters in Turin. At the gate, there was a security barrier too low for any normal car to pass under. But Bertone didn't stop. He drove right underneath it, sliding the Stratos Zero beneath the barrier like a knife under a door. That moment told the world, this car wasn't just design fantasy. It was a fully functional, drivable machine. That act of audacity worked. Lancia realized Bertone had something special on his hands, and though the Stratos Zero itself would never go into production, it laid the foundation for what would become one of the greatest rally cars of all time, the Lancia Stratos HF. So, in 1970, the Zero wasn't just a show car. It was a statement, a gamble that paid off, and a turning point in automotive design. Now that we know how the Stratos Zero was born, let's open the hood, literally and figuratively, and talk about what made this concept car more than just a beautiful sculpture. At its core, the Lancia Stratos HF Zero wasn't built from scratch. It was built on the backbone of a Lancia Fulvia HF 1600, a car respected in rally racing at the time. That meant the Zero had a 1.6-liter narrow-angle V4 engine, mounted in the middle of the chassis for better balance. It produced about 115 horsepower, not an outrageous number, but respectable for the late 1960s. Power was delivered through a 5-speed manual gearbox, again carried over from the Fulvia. But let's be clear, this car was never about horsepower figures. The drama was in its design and proportions. Picture this. Length, 3.58 meters, shorter than most sedans of the time. Width, 1.73 meters, giving it a wide and planted stance. Wheelbase, 2.22 meters, compact and agile. Height, just 84 centimeters, 33 inches. That's less than the height of an office desk. This insane profile made it one of the lowest cars ever built. Even today, when you see it parked next to a modern supercar like a Ferrari or Lamborghini, the Stratos Zero looks like it's melted into the asphalt.
The body was made of fiberglass over a tubular steel frame with sharp angles and flat surfaces that looked like they had been drawn with a ruler. The front end carried an ultra-thin strip of headlights, while the rear was a cluster of tiny circular lamps that looked almost like spacecraft thrusters. Every angle screamed futurism. Inside, things got even stranger. The cabin was more spaceship than automobile. Drivers entered by flipping up the windshield and sliding down into the cockpit. Once seated, you faced a retractable steering wheel column. It had to move to let you get in. The dashboard glowed with futuristic displays, giving it a sci-fi aura that was completely unheard of in 1970. Now, when the Stratos Zero debuted at the Turin Motor Show in 1970, the public reaction was explosive. People had seen concept cars before, but nothing this extreme. Journalists described it as a car from the 21st century dropped into the 20th. It didn't look like a prototype for tomorrow's family car. It looked like something you'd expect to see in a science fiction film. And while it wasn't practical, that didn't matter. The car world thrives on passion and imagination, and the Zero delivered both in spades.
One of the most iconic stories is Nuccio Bertone's stunt at the Lancia headquarters. As he approached the factory gates, the guard lowered the barrier. Any normal car would stop. But the Stratos Zero was so low, Bertone just kept driving, sliding right underneath the bar without touching it. That single act of theater proved the car was more than a static showpiece. It moved, it breathed, it shocked. For Lancia, the reaction was exactly what Bertone wanted. The Zero wasn't going to be mass-produced, but it made executives realize they had a design language worth exploring. Within a year, that same radical wedge DNA gave birth to the Lancia Stratos HF, the rally car that would go on to dominate the World Rally Championship in the mid-1970s. The Stratos Zero's reception also spoke to a larger cultural shift. This was a time when car design wasn't afraid to take risks, when manufacturers and design houses used auto shows to spark imagination instead of just showing facelifts of existing models. The Zero symbolized the optimism of the era, the belief that the future would be bold, daring, and full of speed. But let's be honest, not everyone loved it. Some critics pointed out the obvious flaws: awful visibility, tight interior space, and an entry system that made you feel like you were boarding a submarine. The cooling system was also a problem, as the tiny body left little room for airflow. Yet none of that stopped the Stratos Zero from becoming an instant legend. In the eyes of enthusiasts, it wasn't about practicality, it was about vision. And when you walked away from the Turin Motor Show in 1970, there was no doubt. You had just witnessed something unlike anything else on the road. So, what became of the Lancia Stratos HF Zero after its shocking debut in Turin? Unlike many concept cars that vanish into obscurity, the Zero's story only grew more fascinating with time. First, let's make one thing crystal clear. Only one Stratos Zero was ever built. Chassis number C-1160. That makes it rarer than rare. It's not just a limited production model, it's a one-off automotive sculpture. And because of that, it's become one of the most celebrated concept cars in history. For years after its debut, the Stratos Zero toured auto shows and exhibitions, drawing crowds who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Its outrageous wedge design influenced not just Lancia, but the entire design language of the 1970s. Ferrari, Lamborghini, and even Japanese brands would flirt with the wedge look in their own ways. The Zero proved that radical, almost alien shapes could capture the imagination of millions. But its influence didn't stop at the drawing board. Without the Stratos Zero, there might never have been the Lancia Stratos HF rally car. Lancia saw the excitement Bertone created and realized they could channel that design DNA into a true competition machine. Just a year later, in 1971, the first prototype of the Stratos HF appeared. Still wedge-shaped, still futuristic, but this time practical enough for racing. By 1973, the production Stratos was born, and it went on to dominate the World Rally Championship, winning 3 titles in a row from 1974 to 1976. In other words, the Zero didn't just inspire, it ignited one of the greatest rally legacies of all time. Now let's talk about collectability. The Zero is a unicorn. Because there's only one, it's basically priceless. In 2011, it was auctioned at the Concorso di Leganza Villa d'Este, selling for just over $1 million. At the time, that was a huge figure for a concept car. Today, though, most experts believe it would fetch several $million if it ever came back to auction. But the truth is, the Stratos Zero has reached the level of art. It's no longer just a car, it's a cultural artifact. And it's not hidden away forever. Over the years, it has been displayed at prestigious museums like the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. In 2024, it even appeared at the Pebble Beach Concorso d'Eleganza, winning the Gran Turismo Special Award in the Wedge Concept class. For enthusiasts, seeing it in person is like standing in front of the Mona Lisa of the automotive world. Of course, with legend comes lore. One of the most famous stories is Nuccio Bertone driving the Zero under the barrier at Lancia's factory. But did you know the Zero also had a cameo in pop culture? In Michael Jackson's 1988 film Moonwalker, the Stratos Zero appeared in a sequence where Jackson transforms into a car. That little Easter egg brought the car into the eyes of a whole new generation. And there are details that still amaze enthusiasts today. The fact that you enter by flipping up the windshield, the retractable steering column that makes space for the driver to slide in, the futuristic strip lighting at the front, and the cluster of tiny red lights at the rear that look like something out of Star Wars. These weren't gimmicks, they were visions of where car design might go. So how do car lovers see the Stratos Zero today? With awe and respect. It's not practical, it was never meant to be, but it represents something deeper. The courage of an era when designers weren't afraid to dream. When cars weren't just transportation, they were imagination on wheels. For collectors, owning the Stratos Zero is impossible unless you own the single original car. For enthusiasts like us, the best we can do is cherish its influence, admire it at shows, and celebrate its role in shaping the wedge era. And maybe, just maybe, dream about what it would feel like to climb in, pull that windshield down, and pilot this spaceship of the road. The Stratos Zero belongs to the rarest category of all, concept cars that changed history. It wasn't built to be sold, it wasn't built to be raced. It was built to inspire. And more than 50 years later, it still does exactly that. The story of the 1970 Lancia Stratos HF Zero reminds us that some cars aren't just machines, they're pieces of art, living proof that passion and imagination can bend steel and fiberglass into legends. And the beauty of being a classic car enthusiast is that we get to keep these stories alive, sharing them with the next generation of dreamers.
If this journey through the world of concept cars and radical wedge design got your heart racing, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you'll never miss another deep dive into the rarest and most fascinating machines in automotive history. And don't forget, give this video a like and share it with friends who love classic cars as much as we do. The more the community grows, the more incredible stories we'll uncover together. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think of the Lancia Stratos Zero? Was Marcello Gandini's creation a bold masterpiece or just too wild to be practical? And tell me in the comments, what car would you like to see featured in the next video? Another wedge-shaped icon, a forgotten rally legend, or maybe a timeless classic from the golden age? Your ideas will shape the next journey we take together.